Betty Lou Beets buried her husbands in her own yard, like they were nothing. Not one, but two, right under her roses. This is the twisted story of how a Texas grandma ended up on death row. Let's go back to 1983 when it all started to unravel. Jimmy Don Beets was Betty's fifth husband. She had been married 6 times, one of those husbands, twice, but Jimmy would be the last. They lived in a small house near Cedar Creek Lake, Texas. It was a warm August night when Jimmy disappeared. He went out fishing, Betty said, and never came back. But that was a lie. The truth? Jimmy never left the house. That evening, while her son Robbie was inside with them, Betty pulled him aside. She said she was done with the marriage, done with Jimmy. Then she said something darker. Jimmy has to die tonight. She told Robbie to leave, and he did. Inside, Jimmy sat half asleep in his recliner, the glow of the TV flickering across his face. Betty walked in, raised a pistol, and fired 2 shots to the head. Jimmy never had a chance. When Robbie came back 2 hours later, Jimmy was still in the chair, slumped over, lifeless. Betty didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just said, "Help me get rid of the body." Together, they dragged Jimmy's body outside. They buried him in a fake wishing well in the front yard, a place Jimmy had helped build that summer. He had no idea he was digging his own grave, but now they had a new problem. How do you explain a missing husband? The next morning, Betty had a plan. She scattered Dawn heart medication on Jimmy's boat. Robbie followed behind her, removing the propeller to make it look like a mechanical failure. She and Robbie pushed the boat into the lake and let it drift. After that, they went home and waited. Later that night, August 7th, 1983, at the Redwood Beach Marina on Cedar Creek Lake. It was just after 10 p.m. Lil Smith, a longtime marina worker, was wrapping up for the evening when a few locals noticed something strange out in the water. A boat, drifting upside down in the dark, barely visible under the moonlight. 2 regulars jumped into a small motorboat to check it out. They brought the vessel back to shore. Once upright, they looked inside. Not much, just scattered gear, water damage, and a fishing license. Name: Jimmy Don Beets. Lil didn't wait. She called the Coast Guard. Then she called Texas Parks and Wildlife. She wasn't going to sit around and hope someone else would take over, but something still tugged at her gut. She opened the local phone book and flipped to the B's. There it was, Jimmy Don Beets, Gun Barrel City. She dialed. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. On the 3rd call, someone picked up, a woman's voice. "Hello?" Lil introduced herself. "Hi, my name's Lil Smith. I work at the Redwood Marina. We've just recovered a boat drifting near the shore, and there was a fishing license inside. It belongs to Jimmy Don Beets." There was a pause on the line. Then the woman spoke. "That's my husband." It was Betty Lou Beets. Lil explained again. "We found the boat overturned. We haven't found Jimmy. Just the license, I'm sorry." But Betty didn't cry. She didn't ask a single question. No panic in her voice. She just said flatly, "I'll come down there." And she did. Calm as ever, drove straight to the marina. When she arrived, she walked up, looked at the boat, and nodded. "That's his," she said. Still no tears, still no urgency. Just a cool confirmation. Like she was identifying a lost item, not the vessel her husband had supposedly vanished from. But the question hung heavy in the air. Where was Jimmy? By then, the wind had picked up, and the lake turned choppy. The waves were too dangerous. So officers called off the search until morning. The next morning, August 8, 1983, at exactly 8:30 a.m., Officers showed up at Betty Lou Beets' front door and knocked. Two officers from the Henderson County Sheriff's Office stood outside her small house near Cedar Creek Lake. Betty opened the door, calm as ever. Deputy Jerry Hightower asked, "Ma'am, did your husband come home last night?" Betty shook her head. "Number he went out fishing and didn't come back." Then she added something new. "He's been having engine problems with that boat. Might have been a mechanical issue." That little detail kicked the search into high gear. Jimmy was a retired Dallas firefighter, well known in the area. As word spread, more and more people showed up to help search. Rescue crews came in from all over the state. Dallas Fire Department sent volunteers. Texas Parks and Wildlife brought divers and boats. Even helicopters circled above, scanning the water. They searched for 3 weeks, but no trace of Jimmy. Just an empty boat, and a wife who didn't seem to care. While others were out dragging the lake, Betty stayed mostly at home. She didn't show up to help. She didn't check in with officers. She barely spoke about the search. One man noticed, Chaplain Denny Burris from the Dallas Fire Department. He had known Jimmy for years and decided to visit Betty just to check in. But something about their conversation stuck with him. She didn't ask if divers were still looking. She didn't ask if they'd found Jimmy's fishing pole, his boots, or anything personal. Instead, she asked, "Do you think Jimmy had any life insurance with the city? Would I qualify for his pension?" Burris left the house deeply disturbed. He started making calls. Turns out, Jimmy did have life insurance, around $110,000. And yes, Betty would get $1,200 a month in pension payments. But only if a body was found. Otherwise, she'd have to wait 7 full years to be declared legally dead. With no body, Betty got nothing. A tip changes everything. For nearly 2 years, nothing happened. Jimmy was still missing, no charges, no arrests, until spring of 1985. An anonymous tip came into the Henderson County Sheriff's Office. It was short, quiet, but detailed enough to raise alarms. The caller said, "Jimmy Don Beets isn't in the lake. You should check Betty's yard." Deputies took it seriously. On June 8, 1985, police arrested Betty Lou Beets. They got a search warrant for her property. They returned to her home, the same small house near Cedar Creek Lake. This time, they brought shovels, the horrifying discovery. First, they went to the wishing well in the front yard. The one Betty said was just for decoration. Jimmy had helped build it the summer before. It was sealed in concrete. They broke it open. Underneath, wrapped in layers, was a body. It had been shot twice in the head. It was Jimmy Don Beets. But the nightmare didn't stop there. Out behind the house, beneath a shed, police found another body, badly decomposed, buried deep. It was Doyle Wayne Barker, Betty's 4th husband. Just like Jimmy, he'd been shot with a .38, buried like garbage in the backyard of the house he once paid for. The same caliber collector's pistol police had taken from Betty's house 2 years earlier. It matched both murders. 2 men, 2 graves, 1 yard. How did it get this far? Investigators started digging deeper into Betty's past, and what they found wasn't just shocking. It was a pattern. To understand how a grandmother ended up on death row, we have to go way back to 1937, when Betty Lou Dunavant was born in Roxborough, North Carolina. Her childhood wasn't easy. She lost most of her hearing as a little girl. Doctors said it was due to measles, but later in life, Betty claimed the real cause was something darker: abuse from her father. She said he hit her, and worse. But none of that was ever reported to police or documented in court until years later. When Betty was just 12, her mother was sent to a psychiatric hospital. That left Betty in charge of her younger siblings. Her childhood ended early, and she never really had a chance to grow up like most kids. By age 15, she was married to Robert Franklin Branson, her first husband. They had 6 kids together, but the relationship was rocky, full of fights and separations. They finally divorced in 1969 after nearly 20 years of back and forth. Over the years, Betty married 6 different men, one of them twice. And those relationships? Almost all ended in violence, police reports, or both. Her second husband, Bill Lane, survived 2 gunshots from Betty, once in the stomach, once in the back. She said he had threatened her, and she shot in self-defense. He survived, and shockingly, even remarried her after the shootings. But that didn't last either. Her third husband, Ronnie Thrall, said she tried to run him over with her car in 1978. Her fourth husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, would disappear in 1981. She told people he just left, but she knew where he really was, buried in her backyard. And finally, her fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beets, was killed in 1983 and hidden under the wishing well. In October 1985, Betty Lou Beets stood trial in Henderson County, Texas, for the murder of Jimmy Don Beets. Her defense tried to point the finger at her son, Robbie Branson. Maybe he pulled the trigger. Maybe Betty had nothing to do with it. But then Robbie took the stand and told the truth. He said on August 6, 1983, his mom pulled him aside and said, "I'm done with Jimmy. He has to die tonight." She told him to leave the house, and he did. When he came back 2 hours later, Jimmy was already dead, slumped in his recliner, TV still flickering in the background. Robbie didn't ask questions. Betty didn't explain. All she said was, "Help me get rid of the body." So they buried Jimmy in the wishing well he had built that summer. Robbie later admitted, "I stayed quiet for almost 2 years. I was trying to protect my mom, but now I need to protect myself." When asked what kind of woman his mother was, he said, "A very selfish one." The jury believed him. On October 11, 1985, Betty was found guilty of murder. 3 days later, she was sentenced to death. The long wait on death row. Betty didn't give up. Her lawyers filed appeals for 15 years, trying everything to save her life. They argued that the murders were tied to years of abuse, and that Betty's deafness, trauma, and mental health were never fully understood in court. At one point, a judge even ruled that insurance money wasn't enough motive for capital murder, which could have overturned the death sentence. But that didn't last. The ruling was reversed, and her appeals kept getting denied. By early 2000, there were no more chances left. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets was taken to the Huntsville unit, Texas's execution facility. She was 62 years old. Her daughters made one final plea to the state parole board. They held up photos, showing Betty with black eyes, bruises, and swollen lips. They said she had suffered in silence for years. But the parole board refused to stop the execution. That evening, Betty declined a final meal. She didn't speak much. Her attorney later said, "She's scared. She doesn't want to die alone, strapped down to that gurney." But that's exactly where she ended up. At 6 p.m., Betty was led into the death chamber. Witnesses watched from behind the glass, including Jimmy Don's son, James Jaime Beets. She looked at her lawyer and pastor, gave a small smile. Then the chemicals started flowing. She coughed twice, took a sharp gasp, then went still. At 6:18 p.m., Betty Lou Beets was pronounced dead. No last words, no apology. Jaime Beets later said, "She didn't flinch. She didn't show any emotion." I looked at her face, but I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about my dad. I saw his face in my mind, and I knew he was smiling. It was finally over. From everything we know, do you think Betty Lou Beets acted alone? Or is there more to the story? How could two husbands disappear right under everyone's eyes without anyone noticing? What secrets do you think are still buried beneath the surface of this case? What do you think? Like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. This is the kind of story the world needs to hear. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next.